Okay, week 2, Soul Talks. I am so excited. This is fantastic. This is a new initiative brought forth by myself, Leslie Stoyan, with Daily Apple, which is the company I founded back in 2006, trying to do all sorts of fun and frivolous things about fitness and wellness and trying to just keep it infotainment style, and Soul Fuel Fitness, which is a lovely, lovely studio. It's been open about a year in the West End. And I had the pleasure of meeting them just before this crazy pandemic hit. And we decided we wanted to collaborate and do some stuff together then. And even more so now. I mean, who can think of a better time to align with other small businesses? Which brings me to my guest for week 2, Melanie Sutherland, who is I have got your bio in front of me, so I'm going to read it officially, Melanie, and then I'm going to have you jump in. Melanie is the co-founder and clinical director of Body Co. So here's Melanie's very, very amazing bio. And just like our guest last week, which was Dr. Allison Kelvin, our virologist, I feel sort of like humbled by what you've accomplished here in your short period of time on earth. So Melanie's a graduate of McMaster University, brings 16 years of experience as a senior physiotherapist to Body Co. She's enjoyed a long tenure working with active populations at prestigious sports medicine clinics. Past clients include provincial, national, and Olympic level athletes, as well as members of the National Football League, the Canadian Football League. Oh, my husband's going to love to chat with you. The Ontario Hockey League, American Hockey League, National Lacrosse League, and Major League Soccer. We probably would have been friends in high school. Following the birth of her own children, Melanie developed a strong interest in women's health, and she's taken specialized courses in pelvic floor physiotherapy and women's nutrition. She's passionate about helping women find strength and confidence in their postnatal bodies, hallelujah, following pregnancy and delivery. Melanie is a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Manipulative Therapy and is qualified to perform spinal and peripheral manipulation. Her treatments are focused on hands-on techniques, comprehensive education, and supported by tailored exercise programs and healthy lifestyle modifications. So I think everybody listening is probably like, man, am I in good hands with you? So welcome, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Leslie. I've literally been so excited for this conversation all week. I mean, I get to talk a lot about the postnatal stuff, but what you probably gathered a little bit from my bio is my practice kind of imitates life, and my interests, as I think many of ours do, lie in what we're going through ourselves. So I think I've really been yearning for this perimenopausal discussion, and it's been on my periphery and I've been digging through it personally. So I'm really excited to be on this conversation with you and sort of dive into it, unpack it a little bit.
Thank you. Me too. Me too. It's something that's so strange because it's like very few people talk about it. It's certainly not super glamorous. I think sort of in the way that when postnatal support and moms groups, which we actually have a talk coming up in a couple of weeks about that. When I was born in the 70s, there were like moms groups. There wasn't that. It was, a bunch of mothers sort of, I think, got together and drank wine and smoked cigarettes and talked about how hard their lives were. And that was really the makeshift group. But now there's private clubs, there's everything. So I do feel, as important as it is, there's so much support that's out there for new moms. And you do sort of feel like, okay, I've got options. And then you get to my age, 49, my son's 9, my father's 83. I'm in this weird little sandwich, and my body is becoming my enemy. And I'm like, what's happening? And no one knows, and people this freely. So I'm really excited as well to delve into this. So for the people watching and for the people who are going to watch after, I try to keep it light, as you know, Melanie, and we tend to do something. So Daily Apple sort of mantra is, let's keep everything fresh. Let's keep it a little hip, a little light. Yeah. So we're going to do something called the Fresh in 5 questionnaire. And we're going to do 5 questions talk it through. As I said, we'll probably take us between 20, 25 minutes. So for those of you just jumping on, welcome. You can keep yourself muted. If you have questions, feel free to chat them through. But I will open it up to everybody at the end and we'll get into more deep stuff. Does that sound good to everybody?
Great.
Okay, let's do this. All right, so question, I've got my Apple clipboard.
Love it. Love it.
Question number one. So perimenopause and menopause are terms that have very different meanings. And for the most part, I've always found that perimenopause is relatively new to talk about. But it seems that the majority of research and information that's available out there, or at least until recently, has been about what happens to your body after the periods, or there's this sort of mixed perception of perimenopause and menopause. And so many issues arise in the, which a lot of people don't know, 5 to 15 years prior to menopause, which is the stop. Can you briefly describe, in your opinion, the difference between both and how the symptoms, especially in your practice, you find they vary?
For sure. And I think you're right. There's a lot of clarity around menopause. And I kind of equate it to like when you have uncertainty in your life and like it's creating stress, you know, when you know when that uncertainty is actually unveiled and you know what you're dealing with, okay, I can create a solution, I can create a plan, I can move forward. So that's kind of how I see menopause. So in technical terms, menopause is when you haven't had a period for at least 12 months. Okay. So, and what that essentially means from a physiology perspective is that we've essentially stopped having an egg that's traveling from our follicles through our uterus to our uterus with the potential for implantation. Perimenopause is this very vague, very loose, like kind of blobby, you
Mucky.
know, blobby. That's all I can think of. I feel like everything's blobby right now. 5 to 15 years leading up to that. And I think what's really challenging about perimenopause is my perimenopause could look drastically different from your perimenopause. So there's this whole list of symptoms, and you're right, like it can be anywhere. Some women go through perimenopause very quickly to arrive at menopause. And then some of us have this really long tenure in perimenopause where there's everything that we thought we knew about our bodies just gets kind of chucked out the window. So, I mean, I wrote them down because there's just literally so many symptoms, but everything from hot flashes and night sweats to vaginal dryness, discomfort with sex, urinary urgency, which is where I come in as a pelvic health therapist to see a lot of the bladder issues with people, difficulty sleeping, emotional changes, mood changes, this sensation of like just the worst PMS that you've ever had. Your menstrual cycle just kind of goes off the rails. But I think, you know, the challenge with all of these perimenopausal symptoms is in and of themselves, they're really easy to neglect, right? Like
absolutely.
You didn't sleep very well. Oh, I can think of 5 million reasons. And, you know, I'm a big one in my practice. I think women especially do this. Like, oh, this feels terrible because I'm a mom now. Oh, this feels crummy because I'm old. Oh, this feels crummy because I'm stressed. But perimenopause is this collection of all these things which we tend to neglect until we're like, what the heck is going on in my body?
Yeah.
And to figure that out. And sometimes it's not until we're like, okay, you're right. I haven't been sleeping. My period has been off of its regular cycle for 2 years now. I'm seeing all these abnormalities. I'm gaining weight, but I'm doing all the same things I did 5 years ago. So perimenopause is this, to me, just this very variable period in our lives that's super transitional and is leading to menopause, which we can then deal with a much more concrete, much more solutions-oriented approach. And perimenopause is a little bit like the Wild West. Like we're trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah, you're right. The blob, I always describe it as mucky. Like it's so mucky. It feels, and you're just kind of like fiddling through the muck. The weight gain for me, because I'm a fitness person and I've been active my whole life. I've been one of those people, you know, a little bit of extra pudge if I drink too much beer in, you know, college and partying with the friends. But for the most part, because of my athletic amount of exercise that I have in a day, I was able to just sort of roll with it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, like, why does nothing fit me anymore. I haven't done anything different. And I really truly find that like you can go down to eating almost nothing and you're like, oh wow, I've gained 5 pounds because I had, you know, one slice of pizza and 2 glasses of wine and an apple. And that's
Leslie,
really,
I look at a cheeseburger these days and my pants get tight.
I know. And you like, what, this is why like the movie stars are like, I'm starving all the time. Like I can never eat over, so, you know, but it is a really, really complicated time. The other thing too, that I think adds to it, and we can certainly open this up for people in question period. If you have any comorbidities, if you have, like, or if you ever have any, like I have severe endometriosis, I've had it since I was a teenager. I got diagnosed super early, and it makes things really, really complicated. And the symptoms are wildly all over the place. And then another part, just to sort of, again, put in people's minds, because this is something that a lot of people don't know when I talk about with my friends, you're actually super fertile sometimes in this time of life. I very openly share, I had to go for some testing because of my endo, and they were like, oh, you've got two juicy eggs right there on your ovary. You're on your one ovary. I'm like, two? They're like, yeah, this double ovulation. And they're like, I hope Chris was nowhere near you this weekend, because like he'll sneeze on you and you'll get pregnant. And people often find, you know, oh, I've skipped a couple periods. I'm probably, and you can have one cycle where you're just super fertile. It's like last chance motel. And then you can be like, wow, I'm 50 and I'm having twins. So, you know, these are things that often people don't talk about until they're like, why don't I feel well? Really? I'm having a baby now? Like,
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge. The menstrual cycle is probably one of the more inconsistent symptoms we see. Like some women, like they go to the end where they're like very light, hardly any, and then we have this whole host of women who are having like the heaviest menstrual cycle that they've ever had in their life. And you know, similarly, I'm a cancer survivor, and so like every time I have one of these symptoms, I'm go to my doctor and I'm like, she's like, yeah, I think we're gonna biopsy that. Yeah, like I feel like I've had more chunks taken out of me lately, and you know, it always comes back to like, oh, like everything's fine,
yeah.
but I think you're perimenopausal. So you're right. It also confuses everything else in the world. And I say that, you know, as a little bit of a caution too, because these symptoms are so all over the map, you know, and we can so easily attribute them to perimenopause, but they could be other things. So it is important that we are having discussions with our healthcare providers with that. You know, if you have something like an endo or pelvic floor issue, like make sure this is also what it really is, because these symptoms are very vague. They can be misrepresented as a million different things. So it's a really important time that even though you don't want to pay attention to any of them, you should probably be paying attention to all of them.
That's a really good point. And I may actually, I'm channeling my inner Diane Sawyer and going very journalist. I want to actually jump to question 3 here, and then we'll go back to 2 because it's so important.
Yeah.
But question 3 is back on that thing that they can mimic other things and you don't want to ignore stuff. We are living in COVID times, as everybody knows, and I'm so sick of it. And that's a whole other talk, which we had that last week, and I'm sure it'll come up in everything that we do now.
Yeah.
But and there's lots of information now starting to sort of circulate in non-medical, so don't take it as science. It's women's blogs, chat forums, perimenopausal chat forums. But the symptoms of COVID, flu-like, can be very similar to the symptoms of perimenopause. And there is something called they call it the period flu, the week leading up to your period. And especially at this time, a lot of people feel like, oh my God, like I just have got, everything hurts. My joints are sore. I feel like I'm arthritic. I've achy. I think I have a bit of a fever. I've got chills. And once a month, I'm always like, Chris, I have COVID. I think I have COVID. And Chris is like, check your period tracker, which is like a little app I have. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's a big flower. Okay, I'm ovulating. Okay, yep, no, it's coming. But they're very similar. And it's so, but you also don't want to undermine it. It's very confusing.
Listen, what doesn't have COVID symptoms right now? Like, honestly, my kid sneezes. I'm like, ah, like you
can't go to school.
You are home. What? Wait, mommy's got to work. What the heck? Yeah, I think again, yeah, there's a lot of similarities. And I love that you brought up your period tracker. I am slightly obsessed with tracking my cycle. And actually, we've just started a teen program at the clinic because I think this is information that we actually need to know from the time we begin, before we even begin
Yes.
menstruating, because, it can actually be a real gift. And, our menstrual cycle can actually be a total superpower. But you have to know where you are in your cycle and what the physical, mental, and emotional expression of that is. And I think when we're more in tune with our cycle, so for example, you mentioned ovulation. At ovulation, estrogen is at its highest point. We actually are our most physically beautiful because of this expression of ovulation. We're also our most confident. Like, it's a killer time. Like, if you have a big sales pitch, you want to schedule that sales pitch for ovulation because that's when you're going to knock it out of the park. But as estrogen drops and progesterone starts to creep up and we start to prepare for menstruation again, we move out of this highly confident phase, and it's also this very physical athletic phase, to a time of like intuition and restoration and all of this stuff. So our periods can be confusing enough. And then you want to throw in some joint pain, some hot flashes, some headaches, all of this stuff. Like, it can be really confusing. So my advice to women as they're sort of navigating this journey, and I love that you held up your phone because almost everybody has an iPhone now. Oh, I'm showing you all my text messages. Right in that health app, like, you can get some more in-depth ones, and a lot of them are fertility based. But I mean, even just tracking your symptoms, like, are you crampy? Are you this? Because when we present to a healthcare professional, having an accurate history helps us sort through this a whole lot more too. So definitely, 'cause
Absolutely.
there's a ton of confusion right now. And, if we don't all want to be self-isolated for the rest of our lives, we have to start to be advocates of our own health and managing our own symptoms.
Well, and I want to be your best friend now, Melanie, because honestly, like, I got diagnosed with endometriosis when I was in my teens, and I had my first surgery at 20, and that's a whole other talk. We'll do that for our next round of Soul Talks. But nobody talked about any of that, and it was so isolating to be the girl that was passing out in the swim change room because you had such crippling period pain that no one talked about, and to have your period for 3 weeks out of the month, and be like, and it was very early, it was the 80s. So it was very, nobody talked about this. Shh, don't talk about those things. You're a lady.
Right.
So congratulations to you for,
Thank
I
you.
mean, different age group, but for, if you can empower young girls with the knowledge and the information, and also about learning about when things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going, to get early diagnoses and get help,
Yeah.
so you can navigate your life.
And I do think that's the reason why many of our perimenopausal moms are in the state that we're in. Listen, when I became a pelvic floor therapist, like, I had zero intention of that. Like, I did not want to spend my day up in people's business. Like, that was not my intent. Um, but it was only like when I became a pelvic therapist, like, there was just whispers of it. Now I'm super proud that we're having open conversations about it. But you and I, our age group, we did not grow up with that. So not
No.
just are we not openly having these discussions, we weren't equipped with the narrative to know that it was important and that it wasn't shameful and all of that. So now, of course, it's not surprising that as perimenopausal women, we're like, it's okay, I'm just gonna sit over here as I
Yeah.
bed, and like,
Yes.
because like we don't talk about that.
Right.
And I'll tell you that I'm very often the most interesting person at a cocktail party because people are like, can you tell me
Let's talk
about
about
and then
let's
like,
talk about our
right?
vaginas.
Okay. Yeah. So, not to derail us too much, I have this best story. So that exactly happened to me at a cocktail party where, a friend said, like, so I hear you're doing this. Like, what is it like? And then all of a sudden the questions started coming out. Well, my daughter's at this. And, I speak very openly from an anatomy and physiology perspective with my kids. And we're driving home, and in the back seat, my daughter's like, happy birthday to my vagina. Because I guess we had just talked so much about this that she was like, I'm going to sing happy birthday to my vagina on the way home.
As
But
she should.
as she should. And I was very proud of her. but I was more proud of the women in the room for having that conversation, and
Yeah.
we need to. Anyhow, that's my rant.
No, I think that's
why rant,
awesome.
but
And you know what? All jokes aside, I like to make a lot of cracks at celebrity pseudoscience. But you know, Gwyneth Paltrow's really opened up the hoo-ha conversation. And when you have a candle that smells like her vagina, it really sort of opens the conversation channels to allow you to speak more freely about your parts of your body. So
100%.
well done. All right, we're going to backtrack a little bit about pelvic
Sure.
floor, because pelvic floor, I mean, I'll be honest with you too, and you and I are going to talk and have started to talk about it privately for me. But early days for me, managing my endometriosis, and after I had my C-section, somebody said, Leslie, I think you need to, even though you didn't have a vaginal birth, I think you need to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And I was like, you mean somebody's going to be in there? Like, I was like, I've had too many people in there already, like with doctors probing and horrible stuff happening. I don't want to like have somebody like giving me an adjustment there. But I've learned so much about it since. I've heard about the wonderful things it can do, especially for women that I know who their bladders have been destroyed during childbirth. But in perimenopause, this is something that, you know, your pelvic floor can weaken, even if you've never had kids, even if you had a C-section, it complicates it. If you can pee your pants just because your estrogen is depleting and your hormones are all messed up, what do you do? Like, what does pelvic floor therapy look like? Like, let's talk about that. What can people do other than the, you know, let's do a Kegel? What's a program for someone to strengthen their pelvic floor as they go through these changes?
Yeah, 100%. I'm a big believer that everybody should have their pelvic floor assessed, because, you know, you would never go to a mechanic and expect him to fix your car without looking under your hood. We all need to know what our state of pelvic floor is. And it's hugely important when we think of what the functions of our pelvic floor are. They're sexual, they're sphincteric, meaning, you know, they maintain our bladder and our rectum. They protect our spinal column. They act as a sump pump for just returning any excess fluid. So if you think about it, like, those are massively important things. They factor into participation in almost all aspects of our life, right? Like our relationships, our ability to participate in society, to be recreationally, physically active. So I'm a firm believer that everybody needs to have a pelvic floor assessment, because the other piece of that is the gold standard, and what we recognize now is there's no way of assessing your pelvic floor without an internal. And I get that that is an intimate, vulnerable thing for people, but so is not having sex with your partner for 10 years. So is not going out because you're afraid you're going to pee your pants. So in the grand scheme of things, and I promise we've been trained to really let our patients have control of it, but how you treat your pelvic floor is largely dependent on that sort of baseline state. And you're right, when we get to perimenopause, we know that we have better muscle strength when our estrogen is high. We also know that estrogen factors into the health of our bladder and our urethra. So even if you've never had kids, if you've never, you know, done anything that could presumably a risk factor for pelvic floor dysfunction, just the pure lessening of our estrogen can have an impact on our muscle tone. And that's really all the pelvic floor is a muscle. But the other side of that is this perimenopausal juncture in our life, as you kind of alluded to. Most of us have kids. It's a really stressful time to have kids right now. Most of us also have aging parents. We're at an age where the likelihood is we are probably fairly involved as adults in a career, et cetera. So we know statistically this age bracket has one of the highest stress levels and chronic stress levels, and that also has a massive impact on your pelvic floor. So when I see women in clinic, it's one of two things. Either their pelvic floor is loose, or they are wound so completely tight that it's also having an impact. And the treatments are massively different. I love that you said Kegels. I love and hate Kegels, because for those people where it's weak, it's really important. For those people where it's tight, it's a huge disservice to actually prescribe a Kegel, because you're making your symptoms worse. And we don't know that until we have that investigation first.
That's a really good point. That's something I've never even really thought of before, because it's just innately taught, as it from a fitness perspective, it's just sort of innately taught that that's like, you always need to include that. But that's, it's kind of
Right.
like when you go to the running room and you get gait analysis and they look at your walking, it's sort of like gait analysis for your pelvic floor.
Right. And if you think about the type of people you are in life, like all of us know that person who can't touch their toes because their hamstrings are so tight. So that might not be the person who's going to go do a HIIT class. That's the person who might want to choose yoga and flexibility and mobility. But that person who can't lift the 2-pound weights, they're going to work on some functional strengthening. Well, our pelvic floor is exactly that. And we need to know where we lie on that continuum to make the right decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a good lead in also for question 4. Because the other things that we talked about in perimenopause that can be affected. So pelvic floor is one of them.
Absolutely.
Tissue health. You talked about this, like vaginal dryness. I've even been reading stuff up online about like women who it's like tissue paper there, and they can't use tampons anymore because it's so inflamed and damaged just from lack of estrogen, lack of moisture. Bone loss. That was always a big thing. My
Bone
mom,
mineral density.
yeah, bone density, muscle atrophy. The sort of way the weight changes. So like here's a great example. I have a skirt that it used to be really quite tight on me when I was a lot thinner. And it actually fits me now, even though I'm a lot heavier. And I don't really understand how that's possible. It's just somehow the way that it's shaped, and my body shape has changed, and it's very different. And this is all sort of post having my child at 40. So what does it, we've talked about pelvic floor assessments and that you can be put on programs. What does sort of a holistic preventative program look like for a woman either approaching perimenopause or fully in it and saying like, this talk is motivating me. What are some things I can do?
Awesome. Yeah, I love that question. And I'm in the thick of it myself right now, so I can tell you what I'm doing. I don't think there's one profession that handles this like really well, who covers all the bases. Is really interesting. I just had all my blood work done recently, and by my doctor's standards, my blood work looks great.
Yeah.
My naturopath is like, ooh, this is up, this is down. So a lot of the medical profession sees things just as subclinical. And if you truly want to optimize your health, which I think is a key component to managing perimenopause well, is getting those core foundational pieces back. You kind of need a state of the union, right? Like you need to figure out what's going on in your body. And this goes back to this notion that you and I are very different. So pelvic floor is absolutely one. I'm working with our naturopath right now because I think hormones play a massive part in this. And there's something that's not typically screened for. And
Yes,
even within
absolutely.
that, we had to have the education piece between my doctor and my naturopath. And thankfully they work really well together. But you can't test estrogen at a certain point in your cycle and project, like you actually should be testing estrogen around day 3.
That's right.
And you want to be testing progesterone around day 21 if we're talking about that cycle tracking to see if the appropriate levels are there. Why would you test estrogen on a random day, which could be in your luteal phase at the end, where estrogen is normally dropping? That's not going to tell us where our estrogen level is appropriately at its height. So I think naturopathic has been really huge for me, because the other thing they can do is they can test your stress hormones, which have a big impact on it. So I would say having the conversation with your medical doctor, having the conversation with your pelvic floor therapist, having the conversation with your naturopath. And the other person I'm working with right now is my nutritionist, because guess what? As our body changes, our nutritional needs change. And, this seems a little vain, but I did go to my naturopath and my nutritionist and I said, guys, I'm doing all the things I did 5 years ago, and like the weight just isn't coming off. Right? Like, I'm doing it all. I'm doing my keto, my intermittent fasting, this, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're intermittent fasting? I'm like, uh-huh. I'm like, all the research says it's good. They're like, not if you're a perimenopausal woman under stress. So I've had to reshape all of my nutrition to meet the needs of what my body's going through now. And I think that's really natural as we transition through life, that our body's going to need different things at different times. So that's sort of the team that I'm working with. It's certainly not completely inclusive. There's other amazing specialties out there, but I think that makes a really good starting point for women who are not content with living according to their symptoms, but want to optimize their health to make the, because I mean, 5 to 15 years is a really long time.
It is a really long time. And I'm going to add 2 more in there. One, which this was so shocking to me, and I actually got that same thing. And I couldn't agree more about, I am someone who is amazed at the state of our healthcare system. In some ways, amazed with gratitude that we're Canadian and we have what we have, especially if you watch the presidential debate last night. Oh my train wreck. Wow. Okay. But I'm so grateful in many ways, but in other ways, you really have to advocate for yourself, because I have probably one of the best, I would say the best, gynecologist in Toronto. She's an endometriosis specialist. She delivered my son, and he was very complicated and continues to provide all sorts of wonderful challenges as we get to almost 10. But whenever I go to talk to her about things that I know are related to my endometriosis and to the complicated pelvic issues that I have with perimenopause, but it might be in my spine or it might be in my joints, she's like, I do ovaries and uteruses here. And even with things to do with like tissue damage, she was like, I don't really do vulvas. I got to send you to a vulvar specialist. I'm like, a vulvar specialist?
Yep.
Who knew? So like, and then you have to go on a referral list, and then you have to wait for 6 months. And you really have to sort of know what's going on in your body. 1,000,000%. One of the things that my gynecologist had mentioned was about sex. And she was like, sex is the last thing you want to do when you are in this period of life. It feels sometimes overwhelming and exhausting. And she's like, but it's a muscle, right? Fitness, Leslie. And she's like, 3 to 4 times a week is what we're looking at. I'm like, what now? That's a whole lot of business. Who's got that kind of time and energy?
Look at my schedule again.
But so, talking to somebody about sort of like even a sexual health therapist can be helpful.
Yes.
And of course, fitness trainer. And we have several lots of Soul Fuel clients on here, and people who work out with me. And for me, it's processing that stress. We put on bad pop music. My clients, and we do a lot of like Britney Spears Arms, where we try to tone everything, because it's really hard, and having a bit of a sense of humor about it, I find is really helpful. Which is a great sort of last question. And then we'll open it up to the floor, the pelvic floor, and see what people have to say. So if perimenopause were a fictitious character, so think movie, TV show, comic book, whatever, who would it be and why?
So I love this question. I love it. I am not a creative. And I have literally been like stressing about this question. No. I'm like, come on, there's got to be somebody. I really struggle to put it to somebody specific, but I can think of the characteristics of it.
Okay,
and
go ahead.
Me, she's a bit of a villain, right?
Okay, yes.
A bit of a villain, but a really smart villain, because she keeps us super confused. But I think she's one of those villains that you probably have a little bit of a soft spot for, because I think there's a lot of silver linings that come out of this. I think it's a period where if you can understand things that are going on, it gives you some intuitive advantages. So I think she's a bit villainous. She's very patient, because this whole process is exceptionally long, and nobody has quite the stamina of a 15-year perimenopausal woman.
Yeah, very resilient. Yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of like, there's one part of me that's like, oh, I don't like you. And there's part of me that like has a little bit of respect for her. Like, you're a bit of a badass driving people crazy for this long.
That's good.
So, I feel like people can take that and sketch it into their own mind. I would love to hear if anybody has a thought for it, because I've literally been racking my brain of who this character is.
So the panel, if you want to weigh in, I'm going to open it up. So I have, that's actually a really good one. Wasn't that was it Scarlett Johansson who played her? Or
I think so, yeah.
So that I sort of had the same thing. I sort of see like Devil Wears Prada, Meryl Streep, like
Yeah.
sophisticated, glamorous, evil, but like deep down and resilient, tenacious, relentless, but then can also morph into. So my son was really into Spider-Man for a while. I don't know if you know who Doc Ock is, but it's played by a guy, Alfred Molina. He's really like not that super attractive, and he gets these magnificent mechanical arms that reach into all parts of your body, and I sort of see it as that. So that's my sort of, if I could draw a picture, it would sort of morph from Meryl Streep to Alfred Molina. But Chris, my husband, today he came home. This is sort of related, but it'll be a good segue to the questions. Apparently the top rated song right now, and he didn't understand because he was like, remember last Christmas, they wouldn't allow you to play Baby It's Cold Outside because it was offensive, and and the top rated song is something called WAP, W-A-P by
Oh, yeah.
what's her
I'm
name?
so
Cardi
not cool
B.
about these things. Like I know it a little bit, but I don't ask me to hum it.
So do you know what WAP stands for?
No.
It's wet ass pussy. And so Chris read me the lyrics, and I'm like, holy God, I hope Luke's not listening to this, but it's the #1 song. And Chris is like, how is this? And I said, it is as quite offensive as the lyrics are. It's about female empowerment. It's no longer sort of the dick swinging songs. It's very like, I got a wet ass pussy. But I was like, somebody my age should write a counter song, and we'll call it Whoa, which will stand for withered old hoo-ha. And and then
No, absolutely not.
Hey, and then I'll top to the charts. And anyway, that was just my little perimenopausal joke. We have questions flying in here. So
Awesome.
I've got 6 in the chat, and I'm going to open that up. So here we go. Let me just wrap here. So question number 1 is, I have an IUD and I don't really get my period so much with that in. So I'm not quite sure where I am in terms of still getting periods or not. Any thoughts on how to get a sense of that?
Great question. And I just had, I actually am new to the IUD world because it's part of my treatment. So I think, one of the big things about the IUD is you can take them out at any time and actually your cycle will come back. It is going to be hard to track because IUDs as a form of birth control are also, they're supplementing progesterone. And so your natural rise and fall of your menstrual cycle, is a bit, it's flattened because that progesterone, that certain level of progesterone is already always there. And the way it functions is because that's the case. It keeps our uterine lining thin, which is what we would normally shed. And it also stops the release of eggs. So technically, you can't track a menstrual cycle that you're not having, essentially. But people respond to IUDs in varying cases. Some people will still menstruate. There are different things that you can look at. You can look at things like basal temperature is one. But again, I think if you're somebody who gets in tune with even tracking your symptoms, and symptoms don't necessarily need to be physical, they can be emotional, they can be, mood, all of those things. It might give you a sense of where you are, but without fully taking it out, your hormone balance is off. So it's going to be hard to track that for sure.
That's great. Thank you. So yes, somebody else wrote, yes, poison ivy. Oh my God, hilarious. So there's that. Somebody who had to dash out and said thank you, and they can't wait to watch the rest on demand. So yay, look at us.
Oh.
We're going viral. Okay, another question. I definitely have less patience. Hello. It's like a light switch sometimes. How are you? How was your day at school? Don't throw your backpack over there. I definitely have less patience and hate most. I need to be friends with this person too, and hate most people right now. I get that this is hormonal, but I would like still to be married. Oh, and have friends when all this is over. I'm going to jump in on this one and then turn this over to you, Melanie.
Yeah.
So personal story. My mother died almost 3 months ago, and right in the thick, not of COVID, but very complicated and very quickly. and tragically. So it was very upsetting, which on top of everything else, so now caring for 2 people on either end and dealing with COVID. I am the mad runner of Midtown, and I often run through the neighborhood, and you sort of like, and I run like this because I feel better, because I'm silently fuck you to everybody. But then I get home, and because I've processed that, and I've listened to inappropriate non-Cardi B music in my earbuds, and I get home and I've got that serotonin rush from the exercise, and I've gotten the stress out. That's helpful for me with that, having less patience, and then not bringing the hate home to the fam. So that's my take on it. I'm keeping it anonymous.
And you know what I will say to this, and we discussed this with our teens as well. Those feelings exist whether you're hormonal or not. Your hormones just help you express them. So I'm a big one that I actually don't love when people are like, oh, you're grouchy, you're PMSy, or oh, you must be on your period.
Yeah.
No, I didn't like you when I wasn't
rag.
on the period. I was just kind enough to not tell you at that point.
You're on the rag. Remember that from the, oh my God, are you on the rag? That was a terrible expression. So gross. Anyway, sorry.
My son's just walking in the door. I'm just going to tell. Sorry, you might hear a 3-year-old hoot and holler in the background.
No problem. There you go.
So I would say, with anything, I love Leslie's suggestion. We know that exercise and movement is going to elevate your endorphins. I would also say, we also know that in that luteal phase, we're also more adapted to have empathetic conversations. That's part of our hormonal expression. So you may choose to have hard conversations in that period of time. But I also would say, be kind to yourself. Like, don't feel like you are responsible because of the stage that you're in for these feelings. They're normal. You need to feel them all. Like, stuffing them down just actually creates more stress, which is hard on our neurologic system. So my suggestion is go for that run. Listen to a crappy song. If you need to have a good cry and eat a bucket of ice cream, do it.
Yeah.
Totally do it. Experience all the feels. Don't feel bad for them, but don't make this stage in your life feel shameful or responsible for it. Have those open conversations, because the people who love you will also understand that too. And they need to have the narrative that this is not because you're perimenopausal. It's a tough world out there right now. It's a shitty world out there right now. And we are all entitled to those moments. So
yeah, for sure. And that's, I think, having these big open conversations, which is why I was so passionate about wanting to do this. And I definitely think we've got enough fodder here to go for a second round with a different sort of slant on things, Melanie. We've got one last one here, and then we'll probably wrap up. And people can always email. I'll give all the information after. So the last question is, I didn't have my period for 6 months. I was excited, but then it came back with a vengeance. Is this something I can expect to happen again? I wasn't pregnant. I've had a tubal ligation.
Yeah. So remember that menstruation is defined, or sorry, not menstruation. Menopause is actually defined as 12 consistent months without a period. And that period leading up to it is a slow decline in the amount of estrogen that is expressed. So it's actually quite normal, especially as we progress through the perimenopausal stage, for women to skip periods. But also irregularity is one of the hallmarks of it. So for me, it's not completely off the zone of normal to not have a period for a couple of months and then have a terrible period. What I would say is, and again, this is just caution from my personal experience. If you're really bleeding outside the norm of a menstrual cycle, if things are really unusual, speak to a healthcare provider about it. Just do your due diligence, get it checked out. In all likelihood, it's probably 100% normal. But again, it's really easy to mask symptoms of other things because of the symptomatic uncertainty of this period. So most definitely, if it's concerning to you, but that sounds pretty much like par for the course.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. And that's, and having that tracker is so helpful. So when you do have an appointment, the thing is you should be able to get an appointment relatively easier now, because they'll take often a virtual appointment and it's just a 10-minute chat.
Yep.
And just have all your information ready. This is what my cycle is looking like right now. Do you think I should be, should we take it to the next level? Should I have all your information in hand and tracking it is my advice on that one as well.
Yeah,
it's very I'm sorry, go ahead, Melanie.
I was just going to say, there's a study that shows that medical practitioners on average cut you off within 18 seconds of your discourse with them. And quite frankly, most of them are so heavily busy that if you can come in prepared with good notes, good history, you're more likely to have a more meaningful conversation with them. So yeah, come in with the dates. That's the first thing a gynecologist or doctor is going to ask you about, along with your symptoms. So the tracker is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is proven that this is a really hot topic because of, so I think we have to book another one. And I know, Melanie, you've introduced me to your naturopath and she's very keen to chat. And I'm super passionate about talking about all the food and fitness that we can do to support this.
Yeah.
For those of you that are going to follow the rest of our series, we've got a couple of different ones for the next couple of weeks. But the last one in the Soul Talk series is on grief. And it's, personally driven, of course, with having to process my mother's death, but it's not just about death. It's about grief of everything. And there is a certain amount of grief to a lot of women are like, yay, my period's over. But as I started to notice with my periods changing, there was a certain sort of like, the window's closing. I know, like, I have one child and I will always have one child, but like, you get those little like, could I do one more? Like, I always sort of wanted a second baby. And so there is grief in all of this. There's grief in the state of the world right now. There's big feelings, and we will come together and learn to process that with good information, good science-based information, and humor and inappropriate pop music. So thank you, Melanie. Thank you so much. So for those of you that may have questions that come later, you can get in touch with me. You can check, Melanie and I have been promoting each other on our social media feeds. So you'll be able to see her information about Body Co on Soul Fuel's social media, on Daily Apples, or on Body Co itself. You can Google it. She'll come right up and you can make appointments. Anything else that I might be missing, Melanie?
No, just, don't be afraid to ask questions. It's a weird and wonderful landscape, but be an advocate, ask questions, take responsibility for your own health, and don't feel any shame in that. Like, we make the conversation for the next generation so much easier when we do that.
I wore my son got me this for my birthday. It's my Wonder Woman cuff. So yes, I think we're going to stick through this together. Thank you, Melanie, for chatting. I've got a nice comment here that we're awesome and it's been really fun and they want to come back. And so I think we can just keep taking this conversation to a whole new level. So thank you so much. And thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, we're actually talking about women and alcoholism. So that's going to be very interesting and very important. So thanks, guys, for coming, and we'll see you again.
Take care.